I'm mentally thinking about sunglasses, helmet, buckle, go. All right, out of the water.
Into T1. Carfang. Now he's in second place in this race.
You gonna make him do one more if they're doing first?
We might do that. And he's off, plant. Ouch. Voice goes up. This is the Olympic distance. At mile 24.7. 24.75, 24.8, in first place, Anthony Carfang, coming into T2, ready to dismount the bike, coming off, and running. All one motion, nice job. Easy way to plant, he's already got the bike picked up, so it's an easy plant, makes that transition.
You can usually catch Schlegel's with a bike fit deal, a half price bike fit in January. I highly recommend it, it's extremely useful. There are a lot of other aspects that a good bike fit will help alleviate. If you have a bad fit where your bike seat is too low, you're going to put a lot of extra stress in your quad, and that's going to end up pulling on your patellar tendon. You're going to feel some knee pain in the front of your kneecap if your bike seat's too low. Your pedal stroke's not going to be as efficient. You're not going to get as much power out of your pedal stroke if it's too low. If it's too high, then you're potentially hyperextending your knee. You're going to be using your hamstrings more. You're not going to be engaging your quad as well. So the bike fit is pretty essential, especially when you think about doing 80 to 90 RPM for even an Olympic distance where you're on the bike for a good 2.5 hours-ish, 2 hours, 1.5, somewhere in there. At 80 RPM, that's a lot of revolutions. I'm not feeling that right now. But that repetitive motion at a bad fit is going to wear your ligaments out and cause joint pain as well as ligament strain. So yeah, a good fit cannot be emphasized enough. As you are in the race, you do want to have an efficient pedal stroke. So if you only have sneakers and flat pedals, all of your emphasis is going to be actually on pushing the pedal down, as opposed to pulling back or going over the top of the pedal. All your strength is coming from your quad to push down if you're not clipped in. If you are clipped in and you haven't practiced a good pedal stroke, then you're likely still just pushing down. So one of the exercises I will do a lot, how many of you remember this from last week? Shout it out. One-legged pedal strokes. So this is a great exercise for the trainer. As you build up your bike handling skills, you can do this out on the road as well. So on the trainer, I can just rest my back foot on the trainer. If I'm out on the road, I'll actually put it against the seat stay. And just go with a kind of light resistance for about 30 seconds per leg, and actually work on pulling the pedal stroke back and up. You really want a circular emphasis of your leg into the pedal as opposed to just a really boxy pedal stroke. That extra pedal efficiency will translate really well into tiring yourself out less, using more parts of your glutes and your leg muscles more evenly, and just all around good stuff. One of the other exercises I'll do are high cadence drills. So when I'm racing, when I first started racing, I really liked 75 to 80 RPM because I didn't really have an efficient pedal stroke. As it got more efficient, I got a lot more comfortable at 90 RPM. And now I'll typically be between 90 and 95 for most of my races. But to make myself really comfortable at 90 to 95, I'll do exercises where I'm actually just trying to spin really steadily at maybe 110 or 115 RPM. And trying to hold my core stable, not rock my hips, and just get used to that for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Maybe next week I'll do a minute and a half, and then maybe step it down back to 30 seconds at 120 the next week. And I'll do that a couple of times throughout my workouts. Now, I don't really do that during a race because race day is kind of important, but that really helps to prepare your legs for good pedal efficiency. So if you're racing in Guthrie or around Arcadia, or just out of this parking lot, you're going to encounter hills. Throughout most of the race, in a short race, you're going to just go harder for less time, so you can sustain a higher heart rate. For anything like an Olympic or a half Ironman, it's all about endurance. So you'll typically want to maintain a pretty constant power level throughout the entire race. Something sustainable, not too aggressive. So you don't want your heart rate to spike at all. There's an issue if you spike your heart rate too soon. You're going to build up lactic acid in your muscles faster than your muscles can flush them out, or your heart can flush it out. And trying to recover from that is really just a hard process on your body. So it's usually better to start on the easy side and ramp up rather than letting your heart rate get too high too fast. The same principle really applies on hills. I see a lot of people who see a hill and they want to build up a lot of speed to carry them over the hill. And so as soon as the hill starts, they are hammering and their heart rate spikes. And if you have just a 20-foot hill, you can do that and you can survive to get over it. But a hill, even just as short as this one, your heart rate is going to spike and you're not going to be able to sustain that hard effort from the beginning to the end. You'll peter out around the middle, and then you're going to be struggling, and you're going to be slowing down, and your heart rate's just not going to be able to handle it. So instead, with particularly big hills, you don't want to attack the hill right away. You want to sort of calmly go into the hill, and as you go up the hill, your speed may not increase, but your effort level will. So in that sort of a procedure to go over hills, your heart rate will not spike at the beginning. It'll just slowly ramp up, and hopefully you can figure out how to pace it right and ramp up properly to get over the top. Now once you're over the top, where you're breathing hard and you're in pain and you're going slow, the hill's not over. You want to get back to your race speed as fast as possible. So you want to be able to push yourself back up to that 15, 18, 20 miles an hour as quickly as you can before you recover from the hill effort. It's a lot better for your time and your race overall to recover at 18 miles an hour than recover at 12. So just because the hill has leveled out doesn't mean you're done. Guthrie in particular has a lot of rolling hills. So typically the way my hills would work is slowly ramp it up at the bottom, go a little bit harder as I go over the top. Once I'm flat, I'm really pushing, and I'm still pushing. Now that I'm descending again, I can start to recover. So make sure you carry that speed over the top, and that'll actually really help your times. At 9 miles an hour, 10 or 8 miles an hour, or even slower at the top of the hill, if you are completely dead and just recovering on the flat, that's a lot of time to be going that slow. So definitely make sure you push over the top. Any questions about that? Shifting. How many of you have ever dropped a chain before? How many of you know what that means? Anybody doesn't? So if you're pushing really hard on the pedals and while doing that, shifting, that much torque, so the shifting will move your chain sideways. Your pedal stroke is trying to pull the top of your chain forward, and when you combine those two together, it will drive your chain off of the chain ring and fall either on the pedal side if you're shifting up, or towards your bottom bracket if you're shifting down. And then you get to spin for free and go nowhere because the chain's not moving anymore. So you do want to shift before you need it. If I'm especially shifting in the front, right now I've got a lot of pressure on the pedals. When I'm shifting, I'll make sure I have a really high cadence to let me coast while I let a little pressure off and shift. And the gearing and the trainer's a little off, but yeah, that'll shift a lot smoother and prevent you from dropping the chain. If instead, let's see if I can do this, if I have a lot of pressure on the pedals, and at the same time I shift, well, that didn't drop the chain, but that's when your chain will drop. Now, if you're going downhill and your chain drops, it's not the end of the world. You have a lot of momentum to coast. You don't need to stop and get off your bike and put your chain back on. Instead, let's say your chain is dropped to the inside and you need to shift it back. Slowly pedal and shift it over to try to move the chain back on, and eventually it will catch. So as long as you have speed and momentum that you don't need to get off your bike, you can usually recover without it being an issue. I've had that happen several times, especially in mountain biking. It's not the end of the world to drop your chain. It's really unfortunate if you have to come to a complete stop to do anything. But most of the time you don't have to. But yeah, for hills, wind as well, shift before you need to so you don't drop your chain at all. I did mention you typically want a consistent power throughout your race. The exception for that is when you have hills and wind. Because typically you want to go a little bit harder on the uphills and a little bit easier on the downhills. A little bit harder into the headwind, a little bit easier into the tailwind. And that's, as long as you're comfortable to get through the race, go right ahead and do that. It will improve your time. If, say, we're all going uphill and I'm going really hard, so I'm going 15 miles an hour, whereas you're only going 12, that's a 25% speed increase. If we're going downhill, I'm going a lot harder and I'm doing 30 while you're doing 25, that's a 20% speed increase. And typically downhills don't last as long as uphills, so my speed increase percentage is over a shorter amount of time. So time-wise, that doesn't benefit me as much. Does that make sense? I haven't written out the equations. It's fairly basic math, but yeah. So you typically want to go harder uphills and into the wind. It's a little bit easier and use that recovery on the downhills and tailwind. Yep.
If you're capable of doing those equations while you're riding, do you get time taken off of your total race time?
Honestly, so I'm an engineer. In all honesty, I focus less on my legs when I'm doing math of how fast I have to go to catch that guy in front of me. So my mind does do math while I'm working out. It's a curse. But yeah, it takes the pain out of the legs. Unfortunately, there's no time bonus. If you do your math right, then it probably works out well.
Yeah.
Can you explain when you know you need to be in your big ring versus your low ring?
Right. So regardless of the wind or the terrain, you generally want to keep your RPM consistent. And so you'll shift in order to do that. As the wind starts to pick up in your face or as you start to go uphill, you'll shift into an easier gear so you can keep the same RPM even as your speed changes. And your rear cogs, you have, on this I've got a 10 speed, my wife has an 11 speed. I think pretty much all bikes have at least 7 gears in the back, and so it's a finer adjustment to make sure you keep the same cadence. The chain rings in the front, I've only got 2. Sometimes you'll have 3. Some only have 1. But if you've got 2 to choose from, it's a much larger shifting adjustment. The gear ratio is just a lot larger. So there is a lot of overlap between gear ratios. So if, for instance, let's say right now, I'm in my small chainring and I'm in my smallest cog or my hardest cog, and I've got a really slow cadence. Alternatively, I could be in the big chainring and be in one of the bigger cogs, and actually my cadence is a little bit higher right now for the same effort. So there's a fair amount of overlap. So the question is, which one do you want to be in if there's so much overlap? So there's an issue right now called cross-chaining. Right now I'm in my big chainring on this side and my big cog on this side, which means the chain is not straight, it's going angled. And on my derailleur, it's actually rubbing against the inside of my derailleur. So there's a little bit of resistance there and the power transfer isn't as efficient. Similarly, if you're in your small chainring and your smallest cog, you'll be cross-chained as well.